The Shadow Conspiracy. Chapter 1, Shadows in Chicago. The year was 1856, and Chicago was still more mud than city. Wooden planks stretched over the streets like makeshift bridges, and the smell of smoke from 100 chimneys clung to the fog. Along the riverfront, where warehouses squatted like silent sentinels, the business of trade was booming, and so was crime. Thieves worked in packs, counterfeiters thrived in the shadows, and rail companies lost fortunes to fraud. Amid this chaos stood a man with a thick Scottish accent, broad shoulders, and a piercing gaze that seemed to look straight through lies. His name was Allan Pinkerton, and though the people of Chicago knew him as a Cooper-turned-sheriff's deputy, whispers were already spreading of a detective with an unshakable nose for the truth. That evening, a knock rattled the door of his modest office above a general store. Pinkerton glanced up from the paperwork he had been sorting, reports of stolen freight, missing payrolls, and anonymous threats written in smudged ink. His dog, a wiry terrier named Barney, let out a sharp bark. "Come in," Pinkerton called, his voice steady but edged with caution. The door creaked open, and a tall man in a fine overcoat stepped inside. His face was pale, his mustache carefully trimmed, and his eyes darted about the room as if afraid shadows might leap from the corners. He introduced himself as Thomas Granger, a railway superintendent. "Mr. Pinkerton," Granger said, lowering his voice, "we are in dire need of your services. Our company payroll has vanished. $40,000 in cash. Stolen from a locked safe aboard the train between Chicago and Joliet. No forced entry. No witnesses. Only a mystery." Pinkerton leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "And you've no idea who might be behind it?" Granger shook his head. "The men are restless. If wages aren't paid, we risk a strike. Worse, rumors will spread that the company cannot be trusted to guard its own treasure. We need discretion. We need certainty. We need you." Pinkerton's eyes narrowed. $40,000 is no small sum. Someone on the inside, perhaps. A conductor. A guard. Or even one of your own clerks. Granger stiffened. "Surely you don't mean—" "I mean," Pinkerton interrupted, rising from his chair, "that thieves rarely act without opportunity. And opportunity rarely comes without a helping hand." He grabbed his coat and hat, motioning for Barney to stay behind. "Show me the train car," Pinkerton said. The night air bit sharply as the two men trudged to the depot. The rail yard was alive with the hiss of steam, lanterns swinging, and the distant clatter of wheels against iron. Workers eyed Pinkerton suspiciously as he passed, whispering to each other. His reputation preceded him. Some called him a relentless bloodhound, others a meddler who stirred up more trouble than he solved. The safe sat in the express car, a hulking iron chest now emptied of its prize. Pinkerton knelt beside it, running his thick fingers along the polished surface. No scratches. No dents. The lock, a heavy mechanism imported from New York, showed no signs of tampering. Unlocked from the inside, Pinkerton muttered. He turned to the guards on duty, two men who shifted uncomfortably under his stare. One was broad and red-faced, the other wiry and pale, his hands trembling slightly as he held his lantern. Pinkerton's voice cut through the night. "Which of you had the key?" The red-faced guard spoke first. "We both did, sir. But we kept watch the whole journey. The safe was never unattended." "Never unattended," Pinkerton repeated. His eyes lingered on the pale guard's shaking hand. "Then tell me, how does a safe lose its treasure under two watchful eyes?" The pale guard swallowed hard but said nothing. Pinkerton turned back to Granger. "I'll need a list of every man who touched this train, from engineer to clerk. And I'll need access to your payroll ledgers." Someone planned this carefully. Granger nodded, relief flickering across his features. "You'll have it by morning." Hours later, Pinkerton returned to his office, where the dim glow of a single oil lamp fought against the darkness. He poured himself a measure of whiskey, the amber liquid catching the light. Cases like this were never simple. They were webs, each thread leading to another, until one tug revealed the spider at the center. Barney whined softly, as if sensing his master's troubled thoughts. Pinkerton reached down, scratching the terrier's ears. Lad," he murmured, "there's more to this than stolen money. There's betrayal in the air." He settled into his chair and began jotting notes in his ledger, a habit that kept his mind sharp. Unlocked safe. 2 guards. No sign of struggle. Payroll vanished. Likely inside man. But something nagged at him, an itch just beyond reach. The pale guard's trembling hand. Fear? Or guilt? Pinkerton knew he would soon find out. As the night deepened, the streets outside grew silent, broken only by the occasional rattle of carriage wheels. Pinkerton extinguished the lamp and gazed out the window at the city below. Chicago was a place of opportunity, yes, but also a place where greed bred like rats in the alleys. He clenched his jaw, determination settling in his chest. Whoever had taken that payroll had underestimated Allan Pinkerton. And that was their first mistake. Chapter 2, The Ledger of Lies. The morning sun broke over Chicago, painting the brick warehouses in shades of gold. Allan Pinkerton had been awake long before dawn, his sharp mind unwilling to rest until the trail grew clearer. On his desk lay a stack of documents that Thomas Granger had delivered at first light, ledgers, payroll rosters, and the names of every man connected to the vanished money. Pinkerton studied them with the patience of a craftsman examining flawed timber. Names were inked neatly in columns, figures balanced with precision. Yet he knew numbers could be as deceitful as men. They looked honest until one line betrayed the lie. He traced his finger along the list: engineers, brakemen, clerks, porters. His eyes stopped at a name that appeared twice. Samuel Lowe, a clerk in the payroll office and, curiously, also listed as a temporary assistant on the train's manifest. Why would a clerk ride an express car under guard? Pinkerton shut the ledger, grabbed his coat, and set out into the bustling streets. Chicago was awake now, the rattle of wagons mixing with the cries of street vendors. He moved quickly, boots thudding against wooden planks, until he reached the railway offices on Canal Street. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of ink and coal dust. Clerks hunched over their desks, scratching figures onto paper, while messengers darted in and out with armfuls of documents. Pinkerton's presence caused the usual ripple of unease. Workers straightened, whispers stirred. He was not a man easily ignored. Thomas Granger met him at the entrance, nervously wringing his hands. "You found something already?" "Perhaps," Pinkerton said. "I'll need a word with Samuel Lowe." Granger frowned. "Lowe? He's a junior clerk, barely here a year. Quiet fellow. Keeps to himself." Pinkerton's eyes narrowed. Quiet men often hide the loudest secrets. They found Lowe in a cramped back room, tallying figures in a ledger. He was slight of build, his spectacles slipping down his nose, ink stains blotting his fingers. He looked up, startled, as Pinkerton entered. "Mr. Lowe," Pinkerton said evenly, "you were aboard the train when the payroll vanished." Lowe swallowed hard, his eyes darting to Granger before settling uneasily on Pinkerton. "Yes, sir. Only to assist with the counting. I never touched the safe." "Strange," Pinkerton replied, "a clerk's duties are here, not on the rails. Why were you sent along?" Lowe shifted in his chair. Mr. Granger requested it. He said an extra set of eyes would ensure accuracy." Granger blinked, clearly caught off guard. I did no such thing," he protested. Pinkerton let the silence hang, watching Lowe squirm under the weight of his own words. "Tell me, Mr. Lowe," he said quietly, "did you ever handle the safe's key?" The clerk shook his head furiously. "No, sir. I wouldn't dare." But Pinkerton noticed the tremor in his voice, the faint smudge of grease near his cuff, grease that matched the kind used on the iron locks of the express car. Without another word, Pinkerton turned on his heel. "We'll speak again," he said curtly, leaving Lowe pale and trembling. Outside, Granger caught up with him. "Surely you don't think Lowe capable of stealing $40,000? He's timid as a lamb." Pinkerton gave a grim smile. "Even lambs grow fangs when tempted by gold. But no, he's not clever enough to manage this alone. Someone else is pulling the strings." They walked toward the depot, the noise of the city swelling around them. Pinkerton's mind churned. Lowe's lie about Granger was bold, too bold for a clerk of his nature. Fear was driving him, but fear of what? Exposure, or the man truly behind the theft? At the depot, Pinkerton sought out the pale guard from the night before, the one whose hand had trembled as he held his lantern. His name was Elias Turner, a veteran of the rails, 10 years in service. Turner greeted him stiffly, avoiding his gaze. "You were uneasy last night," Pinkerton said bluntly. "Still uneasy this morning?" Turner cleared his throat. "Just tired, sir. A long journey, nothing more." Pinkerton's stare hardened. "And yet you never left the safe unattended?" "Not once," Turner replied quickly. Too quickly. Pinkerton stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "A man who fears sleep fears his conscience. What do you fear, Mr. Turner?" Turner opened his mouth, then shut it again, sweat beading on his brow. But before he could speak, a whistle shrieked from the yard. A messenger sprinted up, breathless. "Mr. Pinkerton. A break-in, at the freight office." They rushed across the yard to find chaos. A side door of the freight office had been forced open, crates pried apart, papers scattered. But nothing of value appeared stolen. Pinkerton scanned the room, his eyes landing on the shattered lock of a cabinet. Inside had been payroll records, the very ledgers Granger had given him hours earlier. The thief hadn't come for money. He'd come for paper. For information. Pinkerton's jaw tightened. Whoever had stolen the payroll was now trying to erase the trail. But in his haste, the intruder had left a clue, a scrap of cloth snagged on the jagged edge of the lock. Dark wool, finely woven. Not the sort of fabric worn by common laborers. He pocketed the scrap and turned to Granger. "This is no simple theft. Someone inside your company orchestrated it, and they're desperate to cover their tracks." Granger paled. "But who? Lowe? Turner?" Pinkerton's gaze hardened. "Not yet. The hand may be theirs, but the mind behind this is sharper. And I intend to find it." As he stepped into the morning light, the city seemed suddenly darker. Somewhere among Chicago's crowded streets and smoky taverns, a man walked free with $40,000 in his grasp. A man bold enough to outwit guards, unlock an unbreakable safe, and strike again before dawn. But Allan Pinkerton had caught the scent. And once he had it, he never let go. Chapter 3: The Man in the Shadows. Chicago's taverns were the city's second government. Deals were struck in their smoky corners, secrets bought with whiskey, and confessions spilled after a few too many Alesh. Allan Pinkerton knew this better than most. That evening, he slipped into the Iron Horse Saloon, a dim-lit den where railway men gathered after long shifts. The room buzzed with laughter and curses, dice clattering across wooden tables. Pinkerton's presence silenced none of it, but he felt eyes tracking him as he moved toward the bar. He ordered a glass of water. Liquor dulled the senses, and he never allowed his to be dulled on a case. He didn't come for drink. He came to listen. Two conductors at the next table argued in hushed tones. Pinkerton leaned slightly, catching fragments of their conversation. Saw Turner again last night, slipping into the yard after hours. Could be meeting someone, never walks alone anymore. Pinkerton's gaze flicked to the far corner of the saloon. There sat Elias Turner, the pale guard, hunched over a mug of beer. His hands no longer trembled, liquid courage had steadied them, but his eyes darted like a hunted animal's. Before Pinkerton could approach, a stranger slid into the seat opposite Turner. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark wool coat that matched the scrap Pinkerton had found at the freight office. The stranger leaned close, whispering into Turner's ear. Turner nodded nervously, finishing his drink in a single gulp. Pinkerton didn't move. He watched, waited. The stranger placed something, perhaps a folded note, into Turner's hand before slipping out the back door. Turner followed moments later, glancing around like a guilty child. Pinkerton rose, tossing a coin on the bar, and slipped after them. The alley behind the saloon stank of coal smoke and rotting cabbage. Fog rolled low, muting the gaslight glow. Pinkerton kept his steps silent as he trailed Turner through the labyrinth of narrow lanes. The guard stopped at a boarded-up warehouse, rapped 3 times on the door, and disappeared inside. Pinkerton approached, ear pressed to the wooden boards. Voices carried through the cracks, Turner's thin and anxious, the stranger's deep and commanding. "Can't keep this up, sir." Pinkerton's sniffing too close, Turner stammered. "Then keep your nerve," the stranger growled. "He'll find nothing. The money is beyond his reach. But lo, he's ready to break. He nearly confessed yesterday. Then remind him what happens to men who lose their tongues." A chair scraped, heavy boots crossed the floor. Pinkerton's hand hovered near his revolver, but he did not move. He had heard enough. This was no lone theft, it was a conspiracy. And the man in the shadows was its architect. At dawn, Pinkerton summoned Thomas Granger to his office. The superintendent arrived looking haggard, his coat dusted with soot. "You look as though you haven't slept," Pinkerton observed. Granger sighed. "Nor have you, I suspect. What did you find?" Pinkerton placed the scrap of cloth on the desk. "Your payroll thief has friends in high places. A man of means, not a common thug. He uses Turner as his pawn and Lowe as his scapegoat." Granger frowned. "But who?" "Surely none of our directors." "Do not shield them," Pinkerton snapped. "Men of wealth often believe themselves beyond suspicion. That arrogance is what betrays them." He tapped the ledger of payroll clerks. This thief knew the exact train, the exact car, the exact sum. That knowledge narrows our suspects to those with access to company records. "Your board, your senior clerks," perhaps even yourself. Granger bristled. You insult me, sir. I accuse no one, Pinkerton said calmly. I only follow truth where it leads. And right now, it leads into your own house. By mid-morning, Pinkerton paid another visit to Samuel Lowe. The young clerk sat pale-faced in his office, a half-written resignation letter on the desk before him. Running away, Mr. Lowe? Pinkerton asked softly. Lowe flinched, shoving the paper aside. I can't stay here. I've done nothing wrong, but everyone looks at me as if I had. Perhaps because you lied, Pinkerton said coldly. You claimed Granger ordered you aboard the train. He denies it. Why lie if you are innocent? Lowe's lips trembled. Tears welled in his eyes. Because I was threatened, sir. A man came to me weeks ago, tall, well-dressed, with a scar along his jaw. He said if I didn't do as told, harm would come to my family. He made me carry false orders. He made me ride that train. Pinkerton's interest sharpened. And this man with the scar, did you learn his name? Lowe shook his head. No. Only that Turner met with him often. I think Turner fears him more than the law. Pinkerton leaned back, the pieces shifting in his mind. A scarred man of wealth. A strategist who erased records and commanded loyalty through fear. This was no ordinary thief. This was a mastermind with ambition. That night, Pinkerton returned to the abandoned warehouse with two trusted deputies from his growing agency. Lanterns in hand, revolvers holstered, they slipped inside. Dust hung thick in the air, footprints marking the floor. Crates lined the walls, and on one of them lay a folded map of the rail lines, routes circled in red ink, payroll dates scrawled in the margins. This isn't one theft, Pinkerton muttered. It's a campaign. Suddenly, a creak overhead. A figure darted across the catwalk above, a pistol flashing in the lantern light. Shots rang out, splinters flying. Pinkerton rolled behind a crate, returning fire. His deputies scattered, shouting. The gunman fled through a skylight, vanishing into the fog. On the floor below, something fell from his coat, a silver case, monogrammed with the initials HR. Pinkerton picked it up, his jaw tightening. He knew those initials. A wealthy investor, a man often seen at company board meetings. A man whose influence reached from Chicago to New York. The conspiracy had a name now. Chapter 4, The Trap is Set. The silver case with the initials HR lay heavy in Pinkerton's palm as dawn crept across the city. He turned it over, studying the polished surface, the faint scratch marks along its edge. A careless man might have dropped it in flight, but a cautious man, an experienced schemer, would never have allowed such a slip. That meant only one thing, arrogance. The thief believed himself untouchable. Pinkerton knew otherwise. By mid-morning, he strode into the company's headquarters, the silver case tucked discreetly into his coat. The boardroom was a grand chamber with tall windows and polished oak tables, where directors puffed cigars and spoke of profits as if they were kings dividing spoils. Thomas Granger trailed behind him nervously, wringing his hat. At the head of the table sat Henry Rhodes, investor and financier, a man whose sharp jaw was marred by the faint scar Lowe had described. Rhodes looked up with a genial smile, though his eyes carried a glint that Pinkerton recognized, the cold calculation of a man who measured others by their usefulness. Mr. Pinkerton, Rhodes drawled, to what do we owe the pleasure? I trust you've uncovered the scoundrels behind our loss? Pinkerton placed both hands on the table, leaning forward slightly. I've uncovered much. Enough to know this theft was not the work of drifters or clerks. It was orchestrated by someone with intimate knowledge of your operations. Someone here, in this very room. A ripple of murmurs passed among the directors. Rhodes raised an eyebrow. Bold words, sir. Do you have proof, or only suspicions? Pinkerton reached into his coat, producing the silver case. He set it gently on the table, the initials gleaming in the sunlight. Silence fell. One director coughed. Granger's face paled. Rhodes, however, did not flinch. He lifted the case casually, opened it, and withdrew a half-smoked cigar. A fine piece, isn't it? Rhodes said smoothly. But hardly evidence of theft. A man may lose a case anywhere. I could have dropped it in a tavern, for all you know. Pinkerton's voice was calm, but edged with steel. You dropped it fleeing from a warehouse used to plot future robberies. Maps of rail lines. Marked dates. Payroll schedules. All neatly laid out. For the first time, Rhodes's smile faltered. His cigar smoldered in silence. Gentlemen, Pinkerton continued, his eyes sweeping the room, someone here intends not only to steal your payroll but to ruin your company, strike after strike, until your coffers are drained. You can deny it, or you can help me stop it. But mark my words, the spider at the center of this web has already grown bold enough to act in daylight. That afternoon, Pinkerton set his snare. He sent word, through careful channels, that another payroll would be leaving the city in 2 days' time, heavily guarded, traveling by a different route. The message was designed not for the clerks, nor the workers, but for the ears of those watching from above. His deputies, men handpicked for loyalty and cunning, spread across the city like shadows. Some disguised as porters, others as drunken laborers in taverns, their eyes fixed on every movement connected to the company's trains. Pinkerton himself paid a visit to Elias Turner, the pale guard who had grown more nervous with each passing day. Turner's modest boarding house reeked of stale smoke and damp wood. The man sat hunched at his table, staring at a half-empty bottle. "You're running out of time, Turner," Pinkerton said quietly as he entered. Turner jolted upright, fear etched into every line of his face. "I've told you everything I know." "No," Pinkerton corrected. "You've told me what fear allowed you to say. But fear cuts both ways. Fear of Rhodes, and fear of the law. Which frightens you more?" Turner's hands shook. "He'll kill me if I speak." Pinkerton leaned closer, his voice steady. "And I'll see you hang if you stay silent. Choose, man." Tears welled in Turner's eyes. At last, he whispered, "The money's hidden, outside the city. An old mill near the river. Rhodes meets his men there." Pinkerton's jaw tightened. The trail had a destination now. 2 nights later, under a moonless sky, Pinkerton and his men approached the abandoned mill. The building loomed like a skeleton against the horizon, its windows shattered, its walls blackened by years of neglect. From the shadows, Pinkerton raised a hand. His men fanned out, rifles ready, lanterns dark. They waited. Hoofbeats echoed on the road. A carriage drew near, its wheels crunching gravel. Out stepped Rhodes, his scar catching the pale light, flanked by 2 armed men carrying heavy sacks. Pinkerton's heart thudded with grim satisfaction. The trap had worked. "Hold," he whispered. "Not yet." The men entered the mill, their laughter carrying faintly through the night. Rhodes's voice rang out, sharp and commanding, "Count it again. Every dollar." Tomorrow we move on the next train. Pinkerton raised his hand. Now. His men surged forward, lanterns flaring, rifles raised. Shouts erupted. Gunfire cracked, bullets tearing through the night. One guard fell, another fled into the darkness. Rhodes drew his revolver, firing wildly, his face twisted with rage. Pinkerton advanced steadily, his pistol aimed. "Henry Rhodes," he barked, "you're finished. Surrender the money and the men who serve you." Rhodes sneered, blood seeping from a graze on his arm. "You think you can cage me, Pinkerton? I own half this city. Men like me don't fall." Pinkerton's voice was ice. "Then tonight, you learn men like me don't yield." When the smoke cleared, Rhodes lay in irons, his empire of theft collapsing around him. The stolen payroll, still bound in the company's sacks, rested at Pinkerton's feet. But as he looked down at the captured man, Pinkerton felt no triumph. Only the weight of certainty. Rhodes was cunning, yes, but he was not the only one. Men like him thrived wherever greed festered. Chicago was a city rising, and in its shadows, new conspiracies would always take root. Pinkerton holstered his revolver, the resolve in his chest harder than steel. "This case is over," he murmured to his men, "but the war has only begun." Chapter 5: Betrayal in the Ranks. The city of Chicago hummed with rumors after Henry Rhodes's arrest. Newspapers printed headlines praising Allan Pinkerton as the man who had crushed a bold scheme to bleed the railways dry. Merchants spoke his name with respect, laborers whispered it with awe, and tavern drunkards cursed it with bitterness. But victory, Pinkerton knew, was never so simple. A spider may be caught, yet the web remains. Rhodes sat in the county jail, awaiting trial. The stolen payroll had been recovered, yes, but Pinkerton's instincts gnawed at him. The investor's smirk, even in chains, told him this was not the end. Rhodes had allies, wealthy men who would never soil their hands with theft, but who would fund and protect it from the shadows. And worse still, Pinkerton suspected treachery closer to home. 3 days after the mill raid, Pinkerton gathered his men in the agency's modest office. Maps, notes, and confiscated ledgers covered the table. His deputies, rough but loyal fellows, leaned in to hear their chief's next move. "We've stopped Rhodes," Pinkerton began, "but the rot runs deeper. These thefts were not the work of one man. There's a network, and it thrives because someone feeds it from the inside." The room grew tense. The men shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between one another. Pinkerton continued, his voice calm but cutting. "Someone tipped Rhodes about our raids. Someone who knew our plans." One deputy, broad-shouldered Jacob Fields, bristled. "Are you saying one of us is a traitor?" "I'm saying," Pinkerton replied coldly, "that Rhodes knew too much, too quickly. That doesn't happen without loose tongues, or paid loyalty." A heavy silence settled. No one met Pinkerton's gaze. That night, a message arrived at the office. It was slipped under the door, written in a hurried scrawl. "Turner is dead. Found in the river. Be warned, Rhodes has friends still free." Pinkerton clenched the paper in his fist. Elias Turner, the weak link in Rhodes's chain, the man who had confessed about the mill, silenced before trial. Pinkerton's jaw tightened. This was not mere coincidence. Someone had betrayed Turner's cooperation. And that someone had been close enough to hear it. The following morning, Pinkerton visited the jail. Rhodes sat in his cell, his fine clothes exchanged for prison garb, but his smugness remained intact. "You move swiftly," Pinkerton said dryly, holding the message to the bars. Turner's body was pulled from the river. That wasn't chance. That was your command. Rhodes chuckled. You think me a fool? I sit behind iron bars, and yet you credit me with deeds outside. Perhaps your suspicion should fall on those nearer to you. Pinkerton's eyes narrowed. Rhodes's words were venom, but venom often carried truth. The betrayal had not come from outside, it had come from within the agency. Determined, Pinkerton devised a test. That evening, he called his deputies together again, speaking in a tone heavy with false weariness. Another payroll shipment leaves for Springfield tomorrow night, he said, tracing a finger across the map. We'll escort it, quietly. Only those in this room know of it. If Rhodes's men strike again, will no one of you carried word? The deputies nodded grimly. But Pinkerton's sharp eyes caught the flicker of fear in Jacob Fields's expression. After dismissing the men, Pinkerton lingered in the shadows of his office. Hours later, when the building was still, the door creaked. Fields slipped inside, glanced about nervously, then scribbled a note. Pinkerton followed silently as the man crept into the streets and handed the message to a courier waiting in the alley. Pinkerton's suspicions hardened into certainty. Fields was the traitor. The next night, Pinkerton prepared his trap. The Springfield payroll, as announced, did not exist. Instead, a decoy wagon set out from the yard, guarded by men Pinkerton trusted beyond doubt. Hidden in the shadows, Pinkerton watched as masked riders ambushed the wagon at the edge of the city, precisely as he had predicted. Gunfire erupted. The raiders fell into disarray, their confidence shattered when the decoy guards revealed themselves as armed Pinkerton men. 3 thieves were captured, the rest fleeing into the night. But the true prize came later. Pinkerton returned to the office to find Jacob Fields waiting, feigning ignorance. "How did it go, Chief?" Fields asked, his tone overly casual. Pinkerton stepped forward, eyes cold. "It went exactly as planned, traitor." Fields stiffened, his hand inching toward his pistol. But Pinkerton was faster. His revolver leveled at Fields's chest, steady as stone. "You sold Turner," Pinkerton said softly. "You sold us all. Rhodes promised you coin, didn't he? Promised you a share of his empire?" Fields's face twisted with defiance. "Better men than you have taken money from Rhodes. He'll walk free at trial, you'll see. And when he does, he'll bury you." Pinkerton's finger tightened on the trigger. For a heartbeat, silence pressed heavy. Then he lowered the pistol. "No," Pinkerton said coldly. "The law will deal with you. I hunt criminals, Fields. Not corpses." 2 deputies seized Fields, dragging him struggling into the street. His betrayal cut deep, but it also cleared the fog. Rhodes's influence reached even into Pinkerton's fledgling agency, but now the rot had been carved out. Late that night, Pinkerton sat alone at his desk, writing in his ledger. Rhodes, still dangerous. Allies unknown. Conspiracy continues. Fields exposed. Turner silenced. The fire in his eyes burned hotter than ever. He knew this battle was no longer about stolen money. It was about power, corruption, and the survival of justice in a city growing faster than law could keep pace. He dipped his pen once more and wrote the words that had already become his creed. We never sleep. Chapter 6, The Court of Shadows. The courthouse in Chicago was a fortress of brick and marble, its high columns meant to symbolize justice. Yet Allan Pinkerton knew walls and pillars did little to keep corruption out. Inside, men with influence twisted truth as easily as clay. And Henry Rhodes, scarred, smirking, and cunning, was prepared to do just that. The trial had drawn a crowd. Merchants, railwaymen, and curious townsfolk filled the gallery. Reporters scratched furiously in their notebooks, eager for headlines. The prosecution charged Rhodes with theft, conspiracy, and attempted fraud. The evidence, maps of rail lines, payroll ledgers, testimony from Pinkerton's men, was strong. Too strong, perhaps. Because Rhodes looked entirely unafraid. Pinkerton sat near the front, his arms crossed, his eyes locked on the defendant. He studied the jurors, men of the city, some shopkeepers, some laborers. Honest faces, but faces that could be swayed. Especially if the right pockets were lined. The judge called the court to order. The proceedings began. The prosecutor presented the silver cigar case, the seized maps, the sworn statements. Each piece painted Rhodes as the architect of theft. But when the defense rose, the mood shifted. Rhodes's lawyer, a sharp-tongued man named Charles Wentworth, spoke with confidence. "My client," Wentworth declared, "is a man of business, a pillar of this community. He has invested in your railways, your factories, your very city. And now, because of the ramblings of a self-styled detective, he is painted as a criminal mastermind. I ask you, gentlemen of the jury, who benefits more from this spectacle? The accused, or Allan Pinkerton, eager to make his name in the press?" A murmur rippled through the gallery. Pinkerton's jaw clenched. Wentworth was cunning, redirecting suspicion like a stage magician. The defense produced witnesses, clerks who claimed Rhodes had been at meetings during key thefts, businessmen who swore to his good character. All rehearsed, all smooth. But the most damning moment came when Wentworth turned his gaze directly on Pinkerton. "You accuse my client of theft, yet where is the stolen money? Where are the men who can place him at the scene? You claim he leads a conspiracy, yet all you have is supposition and a trinket with initials. For all we know, you planted it yourself." Gasps echoed. Pinkerton stood abruptly, fury flashing in his eyes, but the judge's gavel thundered for order. Rhodes sat back in his chair, smiling faintly. That evening, outside the courthouse, Thomas Granger approached Pinkerton with a look of desperation. "They'll acquit him," Granger whispered. "The jury won't convict a man with Rhodes's fortune behind him. He'll walk free." Pinkerton's expression was grim. "Not if I can help it. There's one piece still missing, the witness who can tie him directly to the crime." "You mean Lowe?" Granger asked. Pinkerton nodded. "Samuel Lowe saw him. He named the scar. But fear has locked his tongue. If he testifies, Rhodes's empire crumbles." Granger frowned. "Then you must protect him. Rhodes's men will silence him as they did Turner." Pinkerton already knew it. And that night, he went to Lowe's boarding house himself. Lowe's room was dim, lit only by a single candle. The young clerk sat trembling at the desk, his hands clutching a Bible. "They'll kill me, Mr. Pinkerton," Lowe whispered. "I've seen what they do to men who cross them. Turner is proof." Pinkerton stepped closer, his voice firm but not unkind. "And if you stay silent, Rhodes wins. He'll bleed this city dry. He'll ruin men by the dozens, destroy livelihoods, and walk free as if the law is his servant. You've the power to stop him. You've the truth." Lowe's eyes brimmed with tears. "But I am no hero." Pinkerton placed a heavy hand on his shoulder. Courage is not the absence of fear. It's choosing to stand despite it. I'll guard you myself, if need be. But you must speak. For a long moment, silence reigned. Then Lowe gave a trembling nod. The next morning, Lowe took the stand. His voice shook, but his words carried across the hushed courtroom. He told of the scarred man who had threatened him, who had forced him onto the train, who had orchestrated the theft. He pointed directly at Rhodes. The gallery erupted. Rhodes's calm mask cracked, his eyes narrowing with venom. Wentworth leapt to his feet, objecting furiously, but the judge allowed the testimony. Pinkerton watched, his chest tightening with a mixture of pride and caution. Lowe had done it. The noose tightened around Rhodes. But then, chaos. A commotion at the back of the courtroom. A man burst through the doors, pistol in hand. A shot rang out. The candlelight seemed to flicker as Lowe cried out, clutching his side. Screams filled the chamber. The gunman fled before he could be seized, vanishing into the streets. Pinkerton leapt to Lowe's side, blood seeping between the clerk's fingers. "Stay with me, lad," he urged, tearing cloth to staunch the wound. "Stay with me. Don't let him silence you now." Lowe's lips trembled. He whispered something faint, "There's more men. Rhodes is only one," before he fell unconscious. The courtroom dissolved into chaos, but Rhodes sat back in his chair, a faint smile returning to his lips. Even behind bars, his reach was deadly. Pinkerton rose slowly, his hands blood-stained, his eyes burning with fury. This was no longer just a case of theft. This was a war against an invisible network of power. And Pinkerton swore, right then and there, that he would tear it out, root and branch, no matter how deep it ran. Chapter 7: The Assassin's Trail. Chicago had grown restless. The shooting in the courtroom had thrown the city into whispers and suspicion. Merchants spoke in hushed voices, workers eyed strangers on the street, and newspapers hinted at a hidden hand pulling strings above the law. Allan Pinkerton felt the city's tension as keenly as the chill wind sweeping from the lake. Samuel Lowe clung to life in a doctor's care, but his testimony, cut short by the bullet, hung like unfinished business. The clerk had revealed enough to wound Rhodes, yet not enough to kill the beast entirely. And Rhodes, even behind bars, smiled as though victory were inevitable. Pinkerton knew better. Rhodes was merely one head of a serpent that stretched far beyond Chicago. Lowe's dying whisper, "There's more men," echoed in his thoughts. That night, as Pinkerton returned to his office, he sensed it. The hairs at the back of his neck stiffened. Barney, his loyal terrier, growled low. Pinkerton's hand slid to the revolver at his side just as a shadow detached itself from the alley. The gun flashed first. A bullet whined past his ear. Pinkerton fired back, sparks lighting the gloom. Barney lunged, teeth sinking into the assassin's boot, buying his master the second he needed. Another shot, this time true. The figure collapsed into the muck. Pinkerton crouched, lantern raised. The man was young, barely 20, his face gaunt, his eyes filled with both fear and hatred. "Who sent you?" Pinkerton demanded. The boy coughed, blood staining his lips. You'll never stop it. Rhodes was just a gatekeeper. The real masters, they're beyond you." And with that, his eyes glazed. "Dead." Pinkerton rose slowly, the weight of the words pressing heavier than the revolver in his hand. The conspiracy was larger than even he had feared. The next morning, Pinkerton met with Thomas Granger in the quiet of the railway office. The superintendent looked haggard, his eyes bloodshot. "You were nearly killed," Granger said, shaking his head. "This isn't a battle anymore, Pinkerton. It's war." Pinkerton nodded grimly. "And war is won by uncovering the enemy's lines. Rhodes may be caged, but others command in his absence. I mean to know their names." Granger hesitated, then leaned closer. "There's a man you should speak to. Silas Quinn, a banker with ties to Rhodes's investments. He's been unusually nervous since Rhodes's arrest. Some say he's withdrawing funds, moving accounts quietly." Pinkerton's eyes narrowed. A rat leaving a sinking ship. That evening, Pinkerton paid Quinn a visit. The banker's house was large, lined with velvet drapes and fine furnishings, yet its owner looked anything but comfortable. Silas Quinn was a round man, his hands fidgeting constantly, his brow beaded with sweat. "Mr. Pinkerton," Quinn stammered as the detective entered, "to what do I owe?" "To survival," Pinkerton cut in. "Rhodes's empire is crumbling. You've tied yourself to him with chains of gold. Those chains can drag you down, or they can be cut, if you talk." Quinn paled. I don't know what you mean." Pinkerton stepped closer, his voice low and sharp. "Do not waste my time. I've buried men braver than you. Tell me who Rhodes served. Tell me who stands above him." The banker wrung his hands. "You don't understand. They're powerful men. Men who wear suits, not masks. If I speak, they'll ruin me, or worse." "They'll ruin you anyway," Pinkerton said coldly. "Unless I ruin them first." At last, Quinn broke. His voice shook as he whispered names: wealthy merchants, a judge, even a railroad director. Men respected in public, but rotten in secret. Pinkerton listened, each name searing into his mind like a brand. This was the wider web. This was the serpent's body. 2 nights later, Pinkerton traveled beyond Chicago's borders, following Quinn's information to a riverside estate where the conspirators met in secret. He took only 2 trusted men, moving under cover of darkness. The estate was ablaze with light, laughter spilling from its windows. Inside, Pinkerton saw them through the glass, men of wealth and influence, drinking brandy as they plotted their dominion. Rhodes had been their front, their expendable pawn. Pinkerton's fist clenched. Evidence was needed, not vengeance. Carefully, he and his men crept closer, listening through the open shutters. "The trial means nothing," one merchant sneered. "With Lowe silenced, Rhodes will be acquitted. Our operations continue. Chicago will bow to us." Another raised his glass. "And Pinkerton? He won't live to see it. His agency is small, his men corruptible. He's just one Scot with too much pride." Pinkerton's jaw hardened. He had heard enough. But as he turned to leave, a floorboard groaned beneath his deputy's boot. The laughter inside ceased. Shouts rang out. Doors flew open. Armed men poured into the night. "Run!" Pinkerton barked. Shots cracked across the riverbank. Lanterns flared. The night erupted into chaos as Pinkerton and his men dove for cover. The serpent had sensed the knife at its throat, and now it struck back. By the time Pinkerton reached the safety of the city, blood streaked his coat from a graze across his arm. One deputy was missing, captured in the fray. The conspiracy had grown teeth, and it would not stop until it devoured him whole. But Pinkerton was no ordinary prey. He was the hunter still. He sat at his desk, bandaging the wound with steady hands. The names Quinn had given him echoed in his mind, each one a target, each one a stepping stone to cutting the serpent's head. "This ends," he muttered, "not in shadows, but in daylight." Chapter 8, The Serpent's Head. Chicago stirred uneasily in the gray dawn. The trial of Henry Rhodes neared its end, yet the city buzzed with fear rather than relief. The conspirators' reach had been revealed to Allan Pinkerton, and he knew this was no longer about one man's guilt. It was about the fate of justice itself. Rhodes still smirked from behind his bars, confident wealth would buy him freedom. But Pinkerton had something stronger than coin, the truth, sharpened into a blade. The last witness. Samuel Lowe, pale and weak from the bullet wound, still fought for his life. Yet Pinkerton would not abandon him. He visited the young clerk each evening at the doctor's house, pressing him gently for every detail. One night, Lowe whispered with labored breath. It wasn't just Rhodes, they passed letters, sealed with a merchant's crest, initials C.W. He paid for the guards to look away. Pinkerton's pulse quickened. Cornelius Wainwright, a wealthy grain magnate and respected civic leader, had long been above suspicion. Now his crest tied him to Rhodes. If Wainwright could be exposed, the serpent's head would fall. The courtroom twist. On the final day of trial, the courthouse brimmed with tension. The defense spoke smoothly, claiming Rhodes was the victim of rivals and a detective's ambition. Jurors shifted uneasily, some nodding. Then Pinkerton stepped forward. He was not the lawyer, but his voice carried authority forged by truth and steel. From his coat he produced a stack of letters, Wainwright's crest pressed into each wax seal. These, Pinkerton declared, were retrieved from Rhodes's safe house. They bear not only plans of theft but orders, signed and sealed by Cornelius Wainwright himself. Rhodes was no mastermind. He was a servant. Gasps rippled. The judge rapped his gavel for silence, but the damage was done. Wentworth, Rhodes's lawyer, sprang up. Forgery. Lies. Then let Mr. Wainwright himself explain, Pinkerton shot back. At the back of the room, deputies dragged in a furious, red-faced Wainwright, arrested the night before at Pinkerton's order. The crest and the letters matched the seal in his office. His protests only confirmed his guilt. The jurors' eyes widened. The serpent's head was exposed in daylight. The serpent strikes. But the conspirators had planned one last strike. As court adjourned, chaos erupted outside. Hired thugs flooded the square, armed with pistols and clubs, determined to free Rhodes and silence Pinkerton. Gunfire shattered windows. Horses reared. Screams filled the street. Pinkerton moved like iron in motion, barking orders to his deputies. His revolver cracked, dropping a thug from the courthouse steps. Barney the terrier snarled at another, buying precious seconds. Through the smoke, Pinkerton saw Rhodes being hustled toward a waiting carriage by masked men. If Rhodes escaped, the serpent would slither back into the shadows. With a roar, Pinkerton charged. He leapt onto the carriage, wrenching Rhodes back by the collar. The two men grappled, fists flying. Rhodes struck with desperation, but Pinkerton's fury was greater. "You thought yourself untouchable," Pinkerton growled, pinning him against the wheel. But even serpents bleed when the blade finds the neck. With deputies closing in, the thugs scattered. Rhodes was dragged back in irons, his final hope shattered. Justice in daylight. Days later, the verdict came. Guilty, for both Rhodes and Wainwright. The courtroom thundered with approval, the city erupting in relief. For once, wealth and influence had not bought freedom. Pinkerton stood quietly in the back, his hat low, watching as justice was declared. It was not triumph he felt, but grim satisfaction. Justice was never permanent, it was a battle fought daily, against men who believed themselves above it. Outside, Granger approached, his face alight with gratitude. "Chicago owes you everything, Mr. Pinkerton." Pinkerton shook his head. "Chicago owes me nothing. It owes itself the truth. My work is never done." The creed. That evening, in the quiet of his office, Pinkerton sat with his ledger. He wrote down the names of Rhodes, Wainwright, and their accomplices. Then, below them, he left a blank line. Not for lack of evidence, but because he knew there would always be another name. Another thief. Another serpent. Barney curled at his feet, tail thumping softly. Pinkerton dipped his pen once more, inscribing the words that had already become the motto of his agency. "We never sleep." And with that, the legend of Allan Pinkerton grew, a man who hunted shadows, tore down conspiracies, and carved justice into a city of smoke and steel.